Yep. Okay. Nice people, both here in Budapest and who are listening in online. My name is David Levin-Kruss. I'm the Director of Jewish Education for Europe for the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee. It's very, very fun for me to be teaching today on the Global Day of Jewish Learning. I'm sitting here, I'm not just saying it to be nice, in really one of my favorite places, my little home away from home, sort of. They had to kick me out, Ballint, sitting over there, had to kick me out last time because I was enjoying it so much. I'm sitting in Moshe House, you can see over here, in Budapest, a lovely, lovely home run by three young men who do really, really lots and lots of fun activities in the community and for people around. Today, this class is part of the Global Day of Jewish Learning, where the theme is journeys. And I thought that we would look at one of the quintessential Jewish journeys, one of the most basic Jewish journeys, which is of the Exodus from Egypt. But we're going to look at it in a slightly different way. We're going to be looking at how it was seen, how it was perceived in two genres, two kinds of music, by Black people in Jamaica and in the United States, in reggae and in African American spirituals. We're going to look what they did with the Exodus story, and then we're going to bring it back to Jewish texts. But the main question that we're going to be looking at tonight is not about African Americans or reggae or even about the Exodus, but is about the own journeys that we do in life, whether it be the physical journeys that we take moving. I just spoke to this young man who was speaking about moving from Rome to Budapest, whether it be the physical journeys we've taken, the internal journeys we take. We're going to be trying to create some type of a structure to make sense of our journeys. To the people sitting here in Budapest, if I speak too quickly, tell me that you should slow me down. For people listening in, you should know that the English of many, many Europeans is fantastic. The story I always tell is that I was in somewhere and I picked up a peach and I put it down, and the woman said to me, "Oh, you don't like the peach?" And I said, "No, I like the peaches that are orange inside." And she said, "That would be called a nectarine." So the English is, you should know, people listening, and that it's really great to be with people who can speak such good English. We over here have listened to Bob Marley and to the African American spiritual. Those at home, I hope that you either listened to it beforehand or will listen to it now. The Bob Marley is a very, very powerful song. And as per usual, there's a bit of a Jewish history behind it. Bob Marley was born in 1945. He died in 1981. He basically popularized the idea of reggae, a specific kind of music. And the album that the song we're going to be looking at on Exodus is from is one of the best-selling, it is the best-selling reggae album of all times. 25 million copies were sold. Those were the days when people bought records. The backstory is incredibly interesting. He was from Jamaica, and in 1976, there is a lot of political violence, and he does a concert. He does a concert in order to try and bring a little bit of calm to what is happening, but he's perceived as being a government supporter. So what happened is that he, his wife, his manager, and a friend, and a few other band members were actually shot. They weren't killed, but so a terrorist came and shot them, at which point he decided that perhaps it was good for him to leave Jamaica for a while, and he went to live in England. So the background to what we're going to be looking is he's done his own personal exodus from Jamaica to England. When he is in England, one of the members of his band goes to a thrift shop, a secondhand shop, and finds the record of a movie called Exodus. I don't know if any of you have seen it. It was very much my parents' generation of a movie. It's totally overdone. The Israelis are all blonde and blue-eyed, the men, and, look like wasps, and everybody is strong, and, all the Israelis, and it has schmaltzy music, the most famous one being, "This land is mine. God gave this land to me." Anyway, somehow he falls in love with this song. He brings it back to Bob Marley. And Bob Marley has a tremendous identification with the Jewish people who've moved from the diaspora back to Israel. It makes him think, of course, of the Bible story, Exodus. This one was Exodus by Leon Uris. And out of this, according to his biographer, at any rate, out of this, his album Exodus came. We're just going to look at a little bit, of one of the songs, but I really think it gives a very, very interesting insight into what he's doing. Any questions or comments at this point? Anybody got anything to ask or to say? And at home, you're welcome to send questions in if you have any. So let's have a look at the source sheet in front of you. He starts up with, this is in the middle of the song Exodus. Open your eyes and look within. Are you satisfied with the life you live in? This is something very interesting, which we'll come back to at the end. But one of the things that Marley does in the song is he speaks about journeys, not only as physical journeys from one place to another, but also about the human struggle to live a life that has meaning. He speaks about people, many of whom never ask this question, or who ask this question and never come to a direction in their life of who they are. And for him, it's very, very important that there can't be any external change without an internal change going with it. And although he doesn't say this, reminds me a lot of when the people of Israel were in the desert and they said to Moses, why did you bring us out here? We had watermelons, we had pumpkin, we had all good stuff in Egypt. They forget all the bad things that happened in Egypt. They just remember the good things, which they probably didn't even have access to. And that was, Marley doesn't say, but that was evocative to me of people who are not interested in living a life of meaning. They're just interested in going back to the flesh pots of Egypt. And he says, we know where we're going up. We know where we're from. We're leaving Babylon. Now, this is very, very interesting. Any associations that people have here in the room, if I say Babylon, either from a Jewish perspective or a general perspective? Any associations you have, Rudy?
Yeah, I can recall songs about
songs about Babylon. Anybody? Rudy said songs about Babylon. Any other associations with Babylon? Anyway, so what he does over here is if you look at the first source at the back of your source sheet, very, very famous, Al Narot, Babel Sham, Yashavnu Gam Bachinu, B'Zachrenu Etzion. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down. We wept when we remembered Zion, which was turned into another song by Boney M, which we'll do another time. But also a lovely song. But what happened was Babylon is where the Jewish people were exiled once they were in Israel. They were exiled. And fascinatingly, for Marley, it's not enough for him to identify with the Exodus from Egypt. He also brings up Babylon. And for him, Babylon was the symbol of capitalistic society that had gone wrong. Egypt was bad. There were slaves there. But people often speak about Babylon as being a place of corruption and of deprivation. And in the Rastafarian religion, which we'll learn about a little bit soon, the current world is seen as Babylon, where white powers keep blacks on the lowest rungs of the ladder. Fascinatingly, what he does in this song is he blends Babylon with the Egypt, because Egypt isn't bad enough. You need to bring up Babylon too. And what's interesting is the rabbis do the same thing. In the Talmud, the rabbis speak about Babylon, the return from Babylon, as the second Exodus. Now, there were no miracles the second time round. There was no sea parting. But this is not going to stop the rabbis in the Talmud. They say the Exodus from Babylon was greater than the exodus from Egypt because there were miracles. It happened in a natural way. But it's very, very interesting. This, I'm sure, is just by chance. But Bob Marley really, really picked up on a Jewish theme, which is to see the exile from Babylon as combined with the exile from Egypt. And then he says, let me just get it. He says, we're going to our fatherland. Yes,
so
please.
it's even easier because like Babylon, like the Jews were forced to go there, and this kind of like relates to the African American history where they were forced to pick them up and move to Jamaica.
Oh God, I love that. I love that. Please remind me of that afterwards. I'm going to write it down. Next time I teach it, I will teach it as my own idea. But in case people didn't hear, remind me your name? Daniel, sorry, Daniel, I just forgot. Daniel said something very interesting, and that is that in Babylon, the Jews were actually forced to go there, whereas in Egypt, they chose to go there because of the famine, and this might be similar to the 15 American blacks who were taken from Africa to America. Very nice. I didn't think about it, but that's beautiful. That's a very, very good idea. Anything else? Anyway, then he says, we're going to our fatherland. So this is very, very interesting, what he says over here. Around this time in America and in Jamaica, you have all different movements that are saying there's no way that blacks will ever get their equality in America, in Jamaica, in colonies. We need to move back to Africa. There was Marcus Garvey, who started a Black to Africa movement. He said there were people called exodusers who wanted to move back to Africa. There was also other exoduses that happened within America much earlier than this, in 1879, where Jim Crow laws were introduced, which discriminated against black people. There was movement in America. I love this stuff. It's universal. It speaks to all of us. I'm just suddenly realizing the irony of a South African-born Israeli teaching a group of Hungarians about the Black American struggle. There is something a little strange about all of that, but I think the mark is that how it does speak, how the stories from the Bible and how it's expressed speak to all of us. But that is a side point. What is fascinating is that in the Rastafarian religion, they have a Jewish connection. If you look at the second source that you have, and King Solomon gave the Queen of Sheba all she wanted. The story is that the Queen of Sheba in North Africa from Ethiopia, she heard there was this very wise man, Solomon. She made her own journey to Israel to meet Solomon. And according to Rastafarian belief, when it said she gave him all she wanted, he actually impregnated her. They had sex, and she had a baby, and that baby came back to Ethiopia, and that baby had children, and from that, the royal line of Ras Tafari was born. Ras is similar to the Hebrew Rosh, like Rosh Hashanah, which means head, and Tafari means a person who is feared, and Haile Selassie, who was the emperor of Ethiopia in this time, he was believed by Rastafarians to be a descendant of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, and his name was Tafari. And then when he became the emperor, he was turned to became Rastafari, and that's where Rastafarianism comes from. He's also was believed to be a rebirth of Jesus. He was called the Lion of Judah. So you can see how strong this idea is, how rooted this idea is of maybe we should go back, not maybe, we will go back to Ethiopia, we will leave behind Jamaica, we will leave behind America, and we will go back to Africa. 2, 3, 4, Exodus, movement of Ja people. People, the people, or is very interesting. JAH is a shortened version of what? No, not of Jamaica, but who said Jamaica? That's a brilliant mistake. It's not right, but I never thought of it that Ja could be Jamaica. Movement, yeah, very nice, very nice, very nice. What? But any other ideas? Yeah. Traditionally, Jews don't pronounce it Yahweh or Jehovah or Yud Kei Vav Kei. As we say, it's a shortened version. This is the inner, the more spiritual, the softer side of God, almost the Shina, if you want to be, the inner spirit of God. And the Rastafarians believed that they were Ja people. That they were Jews, that they were the people of God. His language is very, very interesting. It's movement of Ja people, which also sounds like movement of the people. And as I said, it might be a modern midrash. It may not have been in, I'm not just being nice. It may not have been in Bob Marley's mind, but I really think the idea of it being short for Jamaica is very, very, very clever idea. He says, send us another brother Moses. He says to God, send us another brother Moses. Very interesting. Moses is his brother. He really feels an affinity. Movement of people across the Red Sea. If you look at the third source, and Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord led the sea with the strong east wind all night, and he made the sea into dry land, and the waters split. This is the famous miracle of the Exodus, that God split the Red Sea. And Bob Marley is asking, send us another Moses from across the Red Sea, asking for another miracle to happen. If this movement is ready to happen, then they would have to cross the sea. It would not be the Red Sea, it would be the Atlantic. Atlantic, yes, it would be the Atlantic. But nevertheless, they would also have to cross a sea. We're going to come back to it at the end. But for now, I just want to say in a very, very powerful way, I would claim that Bob Marley is not only co-opting the Exodus to tell his own story, he's not only using the Exodus to tell his own story, he's adding elements to it, and it's something that he is identifying with in a very, very powerful way. Either from people listening in, if you have any questions or comments, are there any questions or comments from anybody in the room about what we've just done? Okay, all good? So now we're going to look at something very different. Now we're going to look at something very, very different. And we're going to look at Go Down Moses, which is a spiritual, and we'll discuss what spirituals are. But we'll start off with the year 1619. A ship arrives in America, bringing the first African slaves to the land which eventually becomes the United States. All in all, as I said before, 15 million Black people. That's the equivalent of the entire Jewish population of the world today. All in all, 15 million people are brought from Africa to America. I remember it happening. I remember one Shabbat morning I was in shul, and people said, "Oh, have you heard the Ethiopians were airlifted last night to Israel?" It was a Friday night. They were airlifted, and I remember Sharansky had a very, very, Natan Sharansky had a very, very strong line. He said it was the first time in history that white people went to Africa and took Black people away for liberation rather than for slavery. So there was a lot of slaves were taken from Africa. In 1620, a year later, a ship called the Mayflower arrives at Plymouth, bringing the people who are the pilgrims. They're leaving America for the New World. They're looking for religious freedom, for gain, for adventure. And basically, the group who came in 1619 became the slaves of the group who came in 1620. By the mid-1750s, 1 in 5 Americans is actually a slave. And what was fascinating, and Yuri just told me about a very interesting movie, Birth of a Nation, which is a remake of a 1915 movie. You want to just tell us a little, you want to just say what you said to me earlier?
Yeah, so basically this is a story about a black preacher.
Yeah.
Who they trying to tend different communities to preach for the black people, to culture them basically. And what happens is that they end up in a revolution or rebellion because of the Bible.
Yeah. So I'm dying to see this movie, and I'm going to see it. I didn't even know about it. Yuri said, just for people in case you didn't hear, that there's this new movie out called The Birth of a Nation about a preacher, black preacher, who's sent by white people to civilize the blacks and to get them to read the Bible and hopefully to pick up things from the Bible, like I'm thinking of the Christian scriptures, blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the world, that they will teach, that the Bible will teach them to be passive and not to rebel. And unfortunately, the Bible's got lots and lots and lots of stuff in it for them. And they might have seen that, but they might have also seen a very, very powerful story of liberation. And that, in fact, that is what happened with blacks in America. They became Christians, but they adopted it and made it part of their own way of life. One of the ways they did it was by creating these pieces of music called spirituals. Nobody knows who wrote many of them. They were created by a community rather than an individual. It was a way for people to express their suffering. They would often sing them while they work. There were two kinds of spirituals of liberation, about being freed, and spirituals about sorrow. And actually, this is both of them. The one we're going to look at is both of them. It's about being freed, about liberation. It's also about sorrow. What's fascinating about it, I mean, human culture, I was just speaking to this young man who's an anthropologist. Human culture is just so fascinating. That's a banal statement if there ever was one. But human culture is just so fascinating. Like you have the Bible, which they try to use to the people to make meek. Instead of making them meek, it empowered them. And then they created culture from this, which northerners, people from the north of the United States would hear, and these songs would make them more empathetic towards what was going on in the South. So you have this fascinating cultural thing, if you will, that it starts off with trying to make people meek, and it ends up with those, not those same people, but similar people becoming more empathetic. Okay, that's enough of a background. Any questions or comments before we actually look at the song? Okay, good. Good, okay. When Israel was in Egypt's land, let my people go. So, let my people go is what Moses said to Pharaoh. If you look at number 4, Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, God says to Moses, go to Pharaoh and say to him, Boil pera v'dibarta alav ko amar Hashem Elokei Avrim. This is what the God of the Hebrews said. Shlach et ami v'yavduni. Let my people go, that they may serve me. And this is very, very interesting. If you think back to what Bob Marley said, it isn't just let my people go, it's let my people go so that they will serve me. It's not only freedom. Isaiah Berlin, the British philosopher, he said you have two types of freedoms. You have freedom from, which is freedom from oppression, and freedom to, which is freedom to do something with your freedom. It's very interesting. I'm very excited. I'm going to Prague later this week, which the last time I was in Prague was not the last time. Making out myself to be more of a world traveler than I am. And I was in Prague in 1994, just a few years after the Berlin Wall had fallen. And I don't think I just imagined it, but I really had the feeling of a people who didn't quite know what to do with their freedom. They were excited to be free. Things weren't as quick then as now. In terms of, so it was still, but I had the feeling they didn't know. I'm really excited to go there and see what has happened and see, hopefully, to get a little bit of a feeling of what it's like now. But it's let my people go so they will serve me. And what happened is that every time Moses said, let my people go, Pharaoh ignored him. And this could be a subtle cry to people in the north. When you sing the song, let my people go, you're also saying to the people around you, let my people go. Oppressed so hard, they could not stand. These are my three favorite words in it. What do you think, especially if your English is strong, but even if it's not, what do you think? And at home, I'd be very excited if somebody wrote in, oppressed so hard, they could not stand. What do you think they could not stand means? What do you think the words they could not stand, the four words they could not stand, means? Yeah.
That the oppression was so unbearable that you couldn't live with that.
Okay, so they couldn't live with it.
They couldn't stay on their feet.
Great, they couldn't on feet. Excellent. And anything else?
We had to like bend down to pick the, I don't know what the English word for the cotton, yeah.
Yeah. So on their feet, great. So they were so. Anybody know any English speakers here? In English, you say, "Oh, I can't."
Maybe like I'm not sure that I can explain that, but the oppressed in a way that they were not standing on their feet, but like were kind of I don't know, sitting or rolling.
Excellent. That they were bent. They were bent down. Anybody know in English standing up for your rights? People have heard that standing up. I think a third meaning is that they could not even protest. Oppressed so hard they could not stand. They were picking cotton. They were in Egypt. They were bent down. They were so oppressed they couldn't stand. At the end of the day, I'm sure all of us have had busy days at some time where you just have to lie on the couch. Second of all, what Balin said, they were pressed so hard they could not stand it anymore. They could not live with it. And thirdly, they were pressed so hard they couldn't even protest against it. One of the most powerful things about oppression is that people don't protest, they just live with it. I would like to claim that this is a continuum. You start off by oppressing people physically. That leads to them not being able to stand it. They have a psychological result, but eventually, if you are a cunning enough oppressor, you beat them down, and a political thing happens that you're not able to protest anymore. And that's why we so often read about liberators who come, because oppressed people very often will need somebody else to come and liberate them. And it's fascinating. Bob Marley said, bring us a Moses. And we're going to see in a little bit in the song that there is an encoded message for somebody to come from the north and to come and say what is going on. And in the Exodus from Egypt, I think you also have these three being fixed up. You have the physical Exodus from Egypt, where they leave. You have the psychological Exodus from Egypt, where Moses wanders in the desert for 40 years, so the generation dies out, and then a new generation can go to the land of Israel. And finally, you have the political tikkun, the political fixing up, when Joshua leads the people of Israel into the land of Israel, and then they have to build a political system of their own. Good, better, bad, worse than Egypt, better than Egypt. Let's not talk about that, but they have to actually deal with power. So I really, I mean, it's incredible. I really think in those 4 words, they could not stand. You have the whole dynamic, I mean, this could be a course on oppression and liberation, just in those few words. Questions or comments on what we just said? All good? Okay. Oppressed so hard they could not stand.
Can I have one question?
Please.
So, like in the Shmot, in the Shmot 9:1,
Yeah.
it says that, like, let my people go that they may serve me.
Yeah.
So why do they have to serve? Is that because of the oppression, or there's another?
Okay, so Balint asked, what is the business with serving? And on some level, this is another class. If you were a cynic, you would say that they were taken out from one form of slavery, which was serving Pharaoh, and another form of slavery, which was serving God. And anybody who's clean for Pesach will know that it might feel like that. Fascinatingly, the rabbis were aware of that. They were aware that it could be just swapping one form of oppression to the other, and they engage in a lot of sophisticated thought playing with ideas to say that service of God is not really oppression, but really somehow your self-fulfillment, doing what you should be doing in the world. But I think you're right. If you look at what's called the pshat, the plain meaning of the words, it does feel like swapping one form of oppression, or slavery, should we say, for another form of slavery. Good. Okay. Anything else? He says, go down, Moses, way down in Egypt's land. So the question is, first of all, it was very, very powerful for slaves that this had actually happened. That there was a time in history when this had happened. And people who study the song are very, very interested in who this might refer to. And there are 3 people that they usually think that the song might be referred to. Some of them lived after the song was written, but it doesn't matter because it's what people were thinking of. One is a former slave called Harriet Tubman, who she went to the north and she started something called the Underground Railroad in 1850, which brought slaves from the south to the north. She was known as Black Moses, and actually, very, very often when they were engaging in one of these subterfuges, they would sing the song to say it's safe or it's not safe or whatever the case might be. So one is Harriet Tubman. The second is a man called Bishop Francis Asbury. He was a church leader who opposed slavery, and some people say this refers to him, and other people say that this refers to Abraham Lincoln, who was president during the Civil War and actually was once in a black church and who sang this and was very overcome with emotion. The question is, why down? Go down, Moses. Any ideas? I mean, before I studied the song, because I was interested in it, I just knew the song. By the way, I don't know people here, but for many liberal Jews in America, they sing this at their seders. And every time I teach it to an American group, somebody will come to me and say, I had no idea it was an African spiritual. I thought it was written for the Passover Seder. So I think in Hungary, people probably don't realize, that it isn't, but it's fascinating that it's become so part of American Jewish culture that people think it's like a Hebrew school song. And I always thought, go down, Moses. Any idea what the down is? Excellent. So this is absolutely brilliant. The go down, Moses, if you look at 5, and Jacob says, and he says, behold, I have heard that there is grain being sold in Egypt. Go down there and buy us some from there, so we will and live not die. Moving from Egypt to Israel, from Israel to Egypt is always referred to in the Bible as down, and leaving Egypt to go up to Israel is always referred to as up. In Exodus 1:10, Pharaoh says maybe the Israelites will go up from the land. But as Daniel said, it also can be going from north to south, down the river Mississippi. Look, abolitionists, look, people who oppose to slavery, come down and see what's going on. Go down, Moses, it says, tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. Thus saith the Lord, bold Moses said. You had to be bold to oppose what was going on. According to the laws of the United States, slavery was legal. So you had no legal ground to sit on, to base yourself upon if you opposed slavery. The only thing you could do is you could appeal to moral things, and you could say, bold Moses, because if you tried to rise up, you could be whipped, branded, dismembered, castrated, put to death. And of course, in Egypt, every time they rose up, things became worse for the Israelites in Egypt. If not, I'll smite your firstborn dead. So there are many, many plagues. There are many, many plagues. But this one only refers to the last one. Even when Pharaoh's last firstborn child dies, that's not sufficient to let the people go. He's so connected to what he is doing. Oh, come along, Moses, you won't get lost. Now, this is brilliant psychologically what's going on. These black slaves are saying to Moses, don't. Come along, you can do it. They are encouraging Moses, but of course they're encouraging themselves at the same time. But there's a tremendous thing, like if I am advising somebody very important, I feel important too. Stretch out your rod and come across, again referring to what we saw with Bob Marley, the crossing of the Red Sea. You won't get lost in the wilderness. Don't worry, Moses. You won't get lost with a lighted candle in your breast. That is not an illusion from the Bible. That is an illusion from their churches where they would use candles. As Israel stood on the waterside, at the command of God, it did divide. O Moses, the cloud shall cleave the way, that means show the way, a fire by night, a shade by day. This is referring to the idea that when the Israelites were wandering in the desert, if you look at number 7, there was a cloud that led them in the day and a column of fire at night. What they're looking for is somebody to guide them, somebody to help them. This world's a wilderness of woe. It's a sad world. Oh, let us on to Canaan go. We need not always weep and moan, and where this slavery chose forlorn, what a beautiful morning that will be when time breaks up in eternity. Very, very powerful song about liberation, about a journey, what it might be. Questions or comments before we move to the last part? People here are getting a little tired, but we've got like 10, 20 minutes more. Keep on, because I think there's still some nice ideas to go. Yes, sir.
I'm just interested in the last 2 lines. This beautiful morning that will be when time breaks up in eternity. It's super positive.
Yes.
In the story, that's not what happens, right? Like they go out and not something good happens.
Correct.
So like how does this fit in?
You're talking about the slaves in Egypt or the slaves in America?
Well, either, I guess.
Well, the slaves in America, they didn't know.
Yeah.
This is my wife mentioned to me when I was talking about this class. One very big difference is that we know the end of the Exodus story. When they were singing the song, they didn't know what the end would be. What a beautiful morning that will be when time breaks up in eternity. I think that is a reference to the second coming of Jesus. I haven't given all the verses over here. I'm not scared of bringing up Christianity. It's an interesting religion for us to learn a lot about. We can learn a lot from. I left some of the Christological references out just because it's a Jewish class in a Jewish setting. But I think that this is a reference to the second coming of Jesus, when time will break up in eternity. And I think there are other Christological references in the poem as well. That is mixed, like Marley mixed Babylon and Egypt. Here they mix Jesus and Moses a little bit, who have similarities. Other questions or comments? Okay, so I'm not in. I'm sharing a thought with you, and for those of you at home, I'm sharing a thought with you. I think it's right, by the way, but I'm not completely invested in it. If somebody wants to prove me wrong, I'll be very, very happy for that to happen as well. But I think these songs, well, I'll ask you, how do you think these songs are different? It's clear how they're similar. Let me ask you, how do you think, and I'm not looking, I have something to share, but I'm not looking for a particular answer now. How, in your mind, do you think these songs are different, the two songs we just looked at? Similar, I think, is clear. They're both about liberation. They both use it. Any thoughts?
The first one, the woman, is more like about the whole group of people. The second one is more focused on just Moses for the person who will bring the change.
That's excellent. Peter said that the first one is movement of the people. It's talking about a whole movement. It's talking about an uprising. It's talking about a phenomenon. Whereas the second one, Go Down Moses, is much more passive in its own, much more passive. It's Moses, please come and save us. Excellent, beautiful. Any other thoughts? Really?
So, first one says, we know we're going, we're leaving, we're going, no.
Yeah.
And then the second one seems like a fairy tale that did happen somewhere there, and it's not necessarily connected to us. We kind of get that it is connected, but it doesn't say that we are leaving, we are going. That's about us.
Yeah. So Marie said that in the first one, there's a certain assertiveness about it. We're going to get there, don't you worry, this is what's going to happen. The second one is much more tentative. It's like, well, we know that happened there, and hopefully it will happen to us, but it's much more tentative. Remember also, we must think about when they were written. This was written probably in the late 1700s, written or composed, I should say, in the late 1700s, where people were really under terrible slavery. When Bob Marley wrote it, I'm not saying things were wonderful for blacks in the United States or Jamaica or England, but he was singing it from an expensive stage, with people paying lots of money for tickets, to selling 25 million copies of his record. He wasn't suffering in the same way that the people were suffering in the South of the United States. So you can understand why they would be more tentative. Excellent. Anybody else? Another difference between them?
It's what you said. That's like for the first one for me is the freedom to do something, and the second one is the freedom from. In the second one, I feel like they just want to get rid of something. In the first one, they have this agency in them that they want to do something.
That's very interesting. Daniel said the first one is freedom to. Very nice, very nice. The first one is freedom to, which is they want to go to Africa. They know what it's going to look like. There's somebody there. In Go Down Moses, it's just freedom from. It's just we want to get rid of slavery. Yeah, fair. What I have to share is actually, I'm very happy to hear what you said. People have certainly said things I haven't thought of, but it's a little bit of a mixture of what everybody's saying. Go Down Moses, very, very interestingly. First of all, it was a very interesting thing, and very typical of oppressed people. They would sing the song, they were really singing about themselves, but to anybody listening, they were just singing about Moses. If a slave owner came and said to them, "Stop singing that song," they'd say, "But we're just singing a song about Moses, like what you said. It's got nothing to do with us." And these verses that I gave you, obviously, when you sang it, some you'd sing in church, some you'd sing while you were working, some you'd sing in private, some you'd sing not, and it wasn't a fixed song. I was just remembering, like in the Soviet Jewry movement, that I still remember, when I was a little bit involved, not that involved. I had friends who were much more involved, but people would sing the song, and then they would say, who was it? Brezhnev, Khrushchev, that just shows that I've forgotten. Tell old Brezhnev to let my people go. That would happen in the South as well. People would make up their songs. If we were to use it as a protest song today, I won't get myself into trouble and say any names, but you could see this as a protest today, saying, "Tell old so-and-so to let my people go." So it was a call and response, which you could adapt, and it was also almost, you have it in humor as well. A lot of times Jewish humor, for example, will be making fun of non-Jews without actually non-Jewish people knowing, because this is how oppressed people will often do their humor. So if you look at the very last, it's on the third page. If you look at the very last thing you have, this is from the Talmud. It says, and it's part of the Seder, "B'chol dor vador chayav adam lirot et atzmo ke'ilu hu yatsa miMitzrayim." In every generation, a person needs to see themselves as if they left Egypt. This means it's not enough on a Seder to say, "Oh, this was a nice Seder. Oh, we didn't spill wine this year. Oh, the Kneilach were better." You really have to experience liberation. You have to feel as if you left Egypt. And then what is the proof? Shenemar, and as it says in our quotes from Exodus, "You shall say to your son on that day, this is what God did for me when I left Egypt." Anybody see a difference between the statement and the proof text? The statement is saying everybody must view themselves as though they left Egypt. The proof text is saying, this is what God did for me when I came out of Egypt. Anybody see a difference between the statement, what they're trying to prove, and the proof of it?
The statement says that the person that by himself Egypt, and the other thing says that Lord helped him.
Oh, that's nice. I wasn't going there, but that's very nice. The first one is actually more secular. A person must view themselves as though they left Egypt, and the second one brings God in much more. God took me out of Egypt. I'm wondering if that could be a connection between the two. I think so in a way. I think that the Bob Marley song is much more about we're going to go and leave out of Africa. It's more secular, whereas Go Down Mountains is much more classically religious. Somebody else, God, come and help us. Very nice. Very, very good. Excellent. Any other difference people see? Well, it's very nice. Very nice. Any other difference people see? In the first statement, it says you should see yourself as if you left Egypt. Even though it's saying you should feel as if you left Egypt, it's saying ke'ilu, as if you left Egypt. You didn't really leave Egypt. You've got to see yourself as if you left Egypt. The second was saying, I left Egypt. In some way, I think this reflects the two songs. In Bob Marley, his exodus is as significant. I'm going a little bit in your direction. His exodus is as significant as the original exodus. It's got Babylon added, it's got Haile Selassie added, it's got Rastafarianism added. It's not like, oh, there was this exodus and I'm a pale reflection of it. My exodus is the exodus. He's the second one. I left Egypt. Whereas I think with the African American spiritual, it's very, very much, and that's why I spoke about how it was sung. That happened there. and we hope that something similar will happen to us. It's much more tentative. Who said it was more? I think you said it was more tentative. I can't remember. It's much more tentative. I would like to claim that this applies. Thank you. That this applies to our own journeys too. There are two tendencies that we might have in our own journeys. One is to see the great journeys of culture as the great journeys. The Iliad, the Odyssey, the Exodus, people leaving Europe to go and live in the United States, the movement of Jews towards the diaspora. Those are the big stories. And I have my own little story. I have my own little story. That's one way, and there's something very powerful about it. I have my own little story, but I see ways that they are similar to the big stories, and that gives my own personal story power. There's another way to look at it, and that is that my personal story is the most central thing in the world. And it's interesting, in Hasidic thought, don't trust anybody who says in Hasidic thought, it means they don't know their source. And that's true, I don't know my source. It's like saying, in Judaism they say, or like in Hungary people say, not very specific. But there is this idea, and somebody will write in and tell me that I was wrong, but it's fine, good, please do. There's this idea that everybody has their own personal Mitzrayim. Mitzar in Hebrew is from Tsar. Some of you know the song, Kol Haolam Kulo, Geshet Tsar Meod. The whole world is a narrow bridge. So Mitzrayim is when you feel in a narrow place. It could be an addiction. It could be a decision that you make that you feel there are only two options, and suddenly you realize a third option. It could be a hospital. It could be a bad relationship. I think if all of us who've lived a little bit will think, there is something in our lives where at a point we felt there was no exit, there was no way out, and somehow we're here today and we managed to get out of this difficult place. According to this idea, what happened to us personally is the real Exodus, and what happened in Egypt thousands of years ago is a commentary on our lives. And I once read somewhere that if you've gone to a really good Seder, this has never happened to me, even though I think that we run beautiful Seders, that if you go to a really good Seder, at the end of it, you shouldn't be sure, you should be not sure whether I left Egypt and the Haggadah is a commentary on me, or whether I read the Haggadah and I'm a commentary on the Haggadah. I understand if you drink 8 cups of wine, that can sometimes happen, but it's certainly not happened to me with 4 cups. But do people see what I'm trying to say? The question is, do we look at our own lives as the center and see culture as being a way to understand our own lives? Or do we see the culture as something out there that we need to identify with, and our own lives is a way to identify with the greater culture? There are advantages to both. Seeing yourself at the center can be very, very egocentric. Seeing culture as being what we need to identify with can be very alienating for people if you don't identify with it. On the other hand, seeing yourself as central can be very empowering to a person and take our own lives and our own journeys very seriously. Similarly, identifying with the great events of history can very, very often help us understand and give our life richness and meaning when we understand that we're not just a little cog in a big chain, but really are part of something bigger. Of course, it's not black and white. We can do both. We can do both. We can balance. We can have a tension. But the message that I have to people listening and to all of us over here, the message for me of journeys is that we have the ability to have an interplay between our own personal journeys and the great journeys of culture, and together learning about it, doing inner work on ourselves, learning about things can really, really help for us to have journeys that have meaning, and that will be, in the words that you quoted, that our journeys can be journeys to not just journeys from. So thank you all very much for joining. And you can turn it off now. You can turn it off now.
Thank you for joining.